Hello, everyone, and welcome to this second Digital MSA Spring session. Thank you so much for joining us today. This session is part of a webinar series with three researchers from where three researchers from Aarhus University each invite academics and activists from their respective research areas to take part in conversations about memory studies in theory and in practice. My name is Alexander Ulrik Thyssen. I'm a PhD fellow at the Department of German and Romance Languages at Aarhus University, and I'm very happy to be your host today, and I'm very much looking forward to moderating this session. In today's session, which is titled Artistic Activism and Memory, the Matapacos Statue Intervention in Santiago de Chile, we'll put our focus on Chile and one of the many artistic urban interventions that occurred during the massive protest wave that swept through the South American country in 2019, an event that has afterwards become known as the Estallido Social, or social uprising. My own doctoral project revolves around the interconnections between memory and activism during this very mobilization, and has a strong focus on various urban interventions, including the Matapacos statue that is the topic of today's session. And it's my pleasure to present today's speakers, starting with Marcel Sola, who is a visual artist and was the main creator of the Matapacos riot dot statue during the 2019 social uprising. Marcel currently functions as the curator of the Museo del Estallido Social, that is a grassroots-driven activist museum dedicated to the memory of the social uprising, whose collection the Matapacos statue is now part of. Marcel is joined by Pablo Zamorano, who's a photographer and visual artist, and Pablo played an integral role in the statue intervention and has extensively documented it as a photographer. Together with Marcel and Pablo, I also want to give a warm welcome to Terry Gordon-Solov, who's an associate professor of comparative literature at the New School in New York, and Eric Solov, who's professor of Latin American history at Stony Brook University, that's also placed in New York. And in 2022, Terry and Eric published the book, The Walls of Santiago, Social Revolution and Political Aesthetics in Contemporary Chile, with Bergen Books, a book that came to be after the authors first-hand experienced the social uprising during a research stay in Santiago. So thank you all four for agreeing to participate in this event. We're so glad to have you here. So the outline of today's session is the following. We'll start out with a presentation of the Matapacos statue project by Marcel and Pablo. And then this will be followed by a presentation by Terry and Eric on their work on the symbolism of the Matapacos protest symbol. And after the two presentations, the speakers will get the opportunity to engage in conversation with each other. And finally, we'll have a good amount of time dedicated to questions from you, the audience, in the end. So please save your questions until then. And without further ado, I will now give the floor to Pablo and Marcel. Please take it.
Hello, everyone joining us today's meeting. I want to start by apologizing for my English. It's not the best, but I'll do my best. Big thanks to the folk who organized this meeting, especially Alexander, and a warm welcome to Terry and Eric. It's a real pleasure to be here with you. I also want to give a shout out to Pablo Zamorano, our awesome photographer and creative mind, who's joining me today. And as we dive into the social and political aspect of the Black Quiltro Matapacos dog sculpture, Pablo, or Locopec, as we know him in the Chilean art scene, has a deep understanding of this monumentous history. So I'll hand it over to him shortly for a presentation we put together.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for assisting this conversation. Now I'm going to share my screen. Today, I am going to talk about the Matapacos monument. These are going to be the 5 topics which I'll be talking about. I think that it is necessary that before talking about the statue and the whole dimension of the Matapacos, it is important to have a baseline of historical facts, because these facts are very closely entwined with the history of the Matapacos, because the protest history is very closely related to the Matapacos history. Second chapter is going to be about the impact on the graphics, a graphic revolution that was held, in my opinion, during the time of the revolt. Then all about the construction and the different recoatings the statue suffered, and then the relationship between the monument and the Museo del Estallido Social, the MES, and finally a compilation of different attacks and political repression that the statue has been victim of, as well as even the word Matapacos has been repressed by media and the politician class. So a brief historic summary. Starting with the revolt, this wasn't an isolated singularity in Chilean history. It was ignited by a 30 peso subway fare increase, which at the time was around $4 US, which is not much, but it was enough for people to fight back and not tolerate any more state abuse. The collective demands that were mainly seen in the streets were about education, health, pension systems, and that mixed up into starting the urge for asking a new constitution, because actual constitution was written during dictatorship and it was illegitimate, as well as the before that and the one before that. So we have a history of illegitimate constitutions. During this time of the revolt, the figure of Matapacos was very mainstream. It soared in popularity as well in artistic creation. And it is important to notice that during this time of the revolt, the institutional response against demonstration was very violent. Many people were killed. Many people lost their eyes, and more than 8,000 human rights violations were done, at least. So going back to 2006, that was the biggest mobilization since the return to democracy. It was initiated by school students. Then another second big movement occurred in 2011, again initiated by school students, but with a later leadership from university students. And between all these whole students' movements, the main demands were about educational inequality, the quality of the education, and its strong profit-driven system that Chilean education is all about. Just as like the revolt, the police repression against students was very harsh during that time. And during the 2011 manifestations, as well as before, many stray dogs accompanied the students. And in the 2011 one, that is the time of this dog called Negro Matapacos. This is when he started to gain popularity between students, up to a point where audiovisual university students did a documental movie about him. You can check that out on YouTube. It's the only piece of documentary work done for the dog. So this is a portrait of the Negro Matapacos, where he died in 2017. It was estimated that he had at least 10 years old. He was a very big dog who weighed like 35 kilograms. He died by old age. He had to be in an assisted euthanasia. And he lived with a woman in Santiago in the center. And this woman gave him food and shelter, and whenever the dog smelled or sensed that a mobilization was going on, he escaped the house to go bark the police or support the students. These are some, in my opinion, very epic photos of the dog at his prime time during the 2011 mobilizations. And going back again to the revolt, to the time and place where the statue was alive during the time of the most important protest in Chilean history. These pictures are in Santiago, near Plaza Baquedano, then renamed Plaza Dignidad. And all those were happened during the summer of the revolt from October to March, really. So second chapter is going to be about the impact on graphics, the revolution that it was held during those months. These expressions were even before the construction of the Matapacos statue. There was a time where it proliferated everywhere, not only on physical public spaces, but on digital spaces as well. That you could see this dog, with this black dog with the red bandana, almost everywhere, and in distinct and in different kind of mediums such as printed press, illustrations, personifications, textile art, murals, paste up, urban interventions, whatever you could imagine of, even a tarot design illustration for the dog. So during that time of the revolt, there was many art generated towards the dog. And one of the reasons that might explain that is the sense of belonging that many people connected with to the symbol of the dog, which I will be talking about that a little bit later. Now, going up to the next chapter about the monument, starting to explain about the creational process behind the statue. It is important to notice that its first author or creator, Marcel, he was already involved in statues using mainly plastic residues to give them a new signification and to work with environmental problematics. So he was already doing this way before the revolt, and the construction of the monument started months before the revolt. At some point, when it already started in October, Marcel and other people recollected plastic bottles and plastic waste. So all that served up to fill to construct this version of the dog statue. Then the statue was first installed in public space the day 15 of November, a day where the politics agreed on a spurious agreement to write a new constitution. All the conditions were set by them without hearing the sovereign will of the people. So a process to change the constitution started, which failed 2 years later. Looking in a retrospective way, I think the process was born dead, because it was only to mitigate the social crisis at that time. And I think it was part of the design that a new constitution will never be written in those terms. So the This version of the monument was around 2 weeks at Plaza Salvador in the Comuna of Providencia. It was mainly coated with paper, with craft paper and black paint. And 2 weeks later, it suffered a very violent attack where it was burned literally to the ground. Only survived the metallic skeleton. And when people saw the remains of this statue, they all started to put flowers and plants around them spontaneously, without no coordination at all. It was a very beautiful act to watch. So many people gathered around. They recollected plants, flowers, even a cargo of flowers was sent to the place. So the new recoating with life will be ready to this new version of the statue. And it looked like this. But it wasn't made to last, because flowers decay and die and dry. So like a week and a half later, there was an improvised workshop where the new metallic recoating of the monument was going to be done. This was in an art gallery in Bella Vista, a place which will later be the Museo del Estallido Social. So at that place, an improvised workshop was taking place, where all the metallic recoating was done. Even a hand-embroidered bandana was made by a collective of women. So at the end of December of 2019, the statue was ready to go back to the streets again, now in a metallic version. But the metal is not indestructible, and the fire that set up the first version of this statue was not the last attack it was going to suffer, because at the end of January, a very violent attack was made again to the statue, this time during the dawn of a Friday. It was a pickup truck towed the sculpture from the neck and beheaded it and leave it in the middle of an avenue. And it was done on a Friday, the day where the most people came to the mobilizations, with the hope that the statue didn't come later that day. But countering that move, that attack, some quick repairs were done during that day, and later, as you can see on the right picture, the statue was with his big patch on the chest, ready to go, was ready on the streets again. Regarding to the symbolism and sense of belonging, first, why is it considered a monument? Well, Matapacos is an icon of social resistance. It is a homage to all the different fights in every trench of people who are fighting back the system. It is important to know that these dogs also serve as they also serve to make visible and strengthen the identity awareness of the Chilean quiltro, which is the stray dog. In reality, I think that we are our own kind of stray dogs, mistreated by the state. The study also powered a marketing campaign focused on adopting Black stray dogs, which are the ones left at the end. So it had many different impacts on people. And on the picture to the right, there is a medical brigade receiving medical supplies because people donated money. For example, people donated money to a team near the statue, and with that money, it was invested in medical supplies to help injured protesters fighting back the police. So in that way, the statue served as a facilitator to help people in the trench of the protest. Also, the statue activated a lot, very activated different territories with different struggles. The first statue visited many places in Santiago, different neighborhoods, as well as Viña del Mar and Valparaíso. And these are some portraits of the statue in different places. First one is at the March 8th manifestation, a few weeks before the pandemic lockdown. Second one is right in front, in Valparaíso, right in front of the actual headquarters of the Chile Navy, which is a building that was the former Intendencia of Valparaíso, a building which is occupied since the coup of '73 by the Navy. I think that's important to tell. And the picture on the right is in an event in Puente Alto against the hydroelectric water predation of Santiago. During the 2020, the year of the pandemic, another version of the statue was made. This was called the Cachorra Matapacos, which roughly translates to the female calf of a dog. And as well as its predecessor, it was built on the Museo del Estallido Social, inside there, and there was many territorial activations as well, mainly outside Santiago, to help the decentralization of Chile, which is all around and about Santiago. And to that point, it visited the big north of Chile, cities such as Antofagasta, Calama, San Pedro, Tocopilla, Copiapó, and Huasco. Next, the relationship with the Museo del Estallido Social. First, I'm going to briefly talk what this project is about. It was founded in 2020, originally located in Bellavista district at the Comuna de Providencia in Santiago. And since 2024, since this year, it is temporarily located at Casa Inmanente in La Florida, as well in Santiago too. This is the muralist painter Miguel Ángel Castro painting the mural, his own version of the Revolt Guernica outside the facade of the Museo del Estallido. And the museum is a self-organized project behind the site that homes the statue. It's called, during the pandemic, the level of invisibilization and negationism of the demands and mobilization of the revolt was so high, and such a dirty move from the politician class to wash their own image, that it endangered the memory of the revolt, of what happened during those months. So the mess serves to protect it in very harsh conditions as well. A few months ago, the mess had to leave its current permanent home in Bellavista because there were some extreme races in the rental, basically to keep them out. They weren't welcome because of the nature of the project behind this. The project is also a process of the own citizenship memory Nowadays, museums can be self-managed. They can be spaces that arise from the community and the autonomy, an outlet to articulate memory and the sense of belonging. They can also develop and build a sense of identity where a group of people can make collective sense. So this place has had its own chapter about the statue and the Matapacos, but it did so much more. It was at that time when it started a role of protecting the memory of what happened during the revolt. And nowadays, current home in Casa Imanente, these are recent pictures of the statue of the dog, which was painted a few weeks ago. It's looking as black as it did in 2019 when it was first installed in public space. Finally, I'm going to talk about different attacks and types of repression around the statue. First, there were some physical attacks, mainly hits, deformations to the soft structure of the first version of the statue. It was painted several times. The first three pictures are from the first statue. The one on the right is the Cachorra, the second statue, who also was victim of various attacks. Both statues were burned, the first one twice, and you can see on the picture of the right how the Cachorra Matapacos was burning while a policeman is watching it burn. Both were beheaded as well too, allegedly by far-right groups who dislike very much the concept behind the Matapacos. And as well as physical attacks, there were many political repression. When the statue of the dog visited Viña del Mar, the driver was given several traffic fines, all coming from the imagination of the police officer because no laws were broken at that moment, just because a dog was being carried that made mad the police. Second case on the image on the right is the actual mayor of Santiago, of the Comuna of Santiago, that in a hope that the current administration becomes re-elected later this year, they didn't allow the statue to arrive to its new permanent home, a place that was in the Comuna of Santiago, and they deceived the local community by changing the terms of a contract. They came to this extent because if they did allow the statue to arrive to the Comuna of Santiago, I think they think that will be enough to not be re-elected, because it's a very controversial figure, what the statue is all about. So they had to do everything in their hand to block the arrival of this statue, up to the point of deceiving their own voters. Thing is, current administration, you can say, is from the left politician side. So they were all about supporting the revolt and the Matapacos during 2019, but not anymore because it's election year. A year ago, there was some policemen that were killed because of crime, but our intelligent politician class tried to associate these murders of police with the name of the dog, Matapacos. Thing for me is mesmerizing because media give them headlines to install these ideas and to dirty the image of what Matapacos was really about. It wasn't about killing cops. It was about the feeling of belonging, of knowing how like the same struggles a stray dog suffers on the street. Many people identify to that feeling. For me, that's what all this symbolism is about. Then all the media has been trying to install that the word Matapacos, that behind the word of Matapacos, a veil of murder of cops, criminality, looting, and generally how the whole revolt was totally illegitimate. So the needed response at that time was the state repression to contain mindless violence. That's the narrative they're trying to install, minimizing what the revolt was all about. So there it comes the importance of places and projects such as the Museo del Estallido Social to protect the memory. And this is another example of during primetime news, political attacks against the statue. And finally, these are some international expressions regarding the Matapacos, the statue, that it is very nice to see how it can be seen, the red bandana over a black dog in different places around the world. So that will be it. Thank you very much for listening, and I would like to thank the beautiful watercolor illustrations done by Mireia Soria.
Thank you so much, Pablo and Marcel, for this presentation. We will move straight on with Terry and Eric's presentation. I can stop the sharing for you. Oh, yeah, everything is working. Perfect. Wonderful. Well, Terry and Eric, if the technology allows it, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Alexander, for inviting us to this phenomenal panel. It's a real honor for us to have the opportunity to speak with Marcel and Pablo. We have great admiration for your work, and have been thinking a lot about the questions surrounding protest art and monuments in public space. So our work comes out of, our work on the Chilean social revolution comes out of personal experience. We were living in Santiago in the fall of 2019 when the Estallido Social erupted. We were struck not only by the massive social mobilization that followed the night of violence on October 18th, but also by the wide range of creative expression that filled the streets. Street art, music, body art, performance art, and site-specific interventions, what became known as an estallido artístico. Eric and I spent the next few months photographing the protest graphics on the walls and documenting the palimpsestic changes that took place over time. We also visited workshops run by artistic collectives and interviewed artists who had taken to the streets. Our book, The Walls of Santiago, seeks to capture the ephemeral work on the walls and to give voice to the artists and activists invested in the struggle for a new Chile. In the third chapter of our book, which is devoted to anarchy, we devote a fair amount of space to the iconic symbol of the Negro Matapacos. So in our talk today, we would like to present our interpretations of the complex symbol and to consider how it mobilizes key themes and artistic approaches in the social revolution.
So I'd like to backtrack slightly to the beginnings of the estallido, when a single word, evade, signaled the start of a mass rebellion. From the verb evadir, meaning to evade or to dodge, the graffiti appeared overnight, scrawled across clean surfaces throughout the city. As a prominent graffiti near the intersection of the middle-class neighborhoods of Providencia and Las Condes explained, evade means exigir, to demand. Within hours, the word signaled a command not only to make demands of the state, but to reclaim public surfaces in the name of insurrection. That the command found resonance among the middle classes pointed to a deep backlash brewing against the nation's political leadership and the market-driven economic model that had been the hallmark of the post-Pinochet era. As the protest movement rapidly spread, there were numerous semantic and stylistic usages of evade, ranging from the lyrical to the more militant, reflective both of the movement's creative ethos as well as the variety of anarchist strains that pursued a more aggressive stance in the face of state violence. Indeed, the extent of violence in the estallido took most Chileans by surprise and became the focus of numerous commentaries in the initial days of the uprising. The walls, too, reflected this conversation. Was it necessary to burn it all down in order to be heard? A graphic message along Avenida Providencia queried, with "Sí" as the only obvious answer written next to it. The utter devastation of the Baquedano metro station itself became a celebrated symbol among protesters and underscored the ways in which the 2019-20 uprising was fundamentally different from earlier movements. Radiating outward from this ground zero of the estallido, there were repeated attacks on buildings, especially those representing multinational capital, not only through graffiti defacement, but through the shattering of windows, lighting of fires, and other degrees of rampage. It is in this context that we need to understand the political and cultural significance of the Negro Matapacos more broadly, and of Marcel's oversized Matapacos more specifically. As we've heard from Pablo just now, the real Matapacos died in 2017. But in the context of the 2019 estallido, he was symbolically resurrected, and his image, in its diverse iterations, provided a unifying symbol for the protests. As Graciela Acuña, a feminist activist and historian, conveyed to us, quote, "He's a mestizo dog, one made up of muchas razas, many races. In that respect, he is a symbol of recognizing our own mestizaje, of changing our subjectivities as Chileans to give new life into the meaning of the word pueblo." Yet if his message provided a unifying symbol for the protesters, at the same time, there was a wide spectrum of representations of the Matapacos. He barked, so to speak, in a variety of tones, from the absurdist to the menacing. The wide range of imagery associated with the Matapacos in the estallido itself reflected the inherent tensions embedded within the call to evade, to evade, the phrase that sparked youth's revolutionary fervor. At one end of this spectrum stood the beatification of Matapacos, a trope often accompanied by the incorporation of a radiating halo. In these depictions, the dog was presented as a martyred mendicant, an actor from the margins of society whose selfless solidarity with the student protesters in 2011 communicated a sense of moral perseverance, his likeness imbued with spiritual power. Here, a reverential wall mosaic was assembled using fragments of differently colored tiles. Set against a soothing orange and yellow speckled tile backdrop, the color composition creates the effect of a stained glass church window. This same gentle posture was reproduced in various instances of wall graffiti, often with slight variations. In this example, the incorporation of a bold aquamarine outline graphically brings the dog to life, aided by the inclusion of the 3 action lines. Dripping red paint shots surround but cannot penetrate this mystical protector. This notion of the Negro Matapacos as a protective saint was rendered more explicit in a poster that shows in detail the dog's upper body nestled within a bed of flowers. Votive candles burn reverentially, and an elaborate halo radiates outward. His bright eyes and warm smile clearly signify a sentiment of protective optimism, underscored by the text at the bottom, patron saint of protesters and stray dogs. At the other end of the spectrum, however, was a very different resurrection of the Negro de Matapacos. Here he is presented not as a pacifist protector, but as an engaged combatant. The dog's warm smile is transformed into an angry snarl. In this example, the Matapacos directly confronts the viewer. His posture is in attack mode, his sharp teeth menacingly visible. The text, "For a future without fear," references a central statement of the Estallido, one that signaled a generational shift in attitudes towards the military and state police. The immediate impression is that of aggressive resistance. Another version pointed to a different variation on the theme of saintliness. Here, the inclusion of two stylized crosses seems to mock the very notion of religious reverence, a point underscored by the accompanying text, "The only one to whom I pray, Saint Negro Matapacos." This multi-layered stencil at first glance appears to mirror the more religiously reverential graphic images noted earlier. Once again, we see the dog's smiling face, his eyes shining brightly. A row of colorful flowers is arranged underneath, a clear reference to the roses or lilies used in traditional religious iconography. Yet upon closer inspection, one notices the integration of two lit Molotov cocktails protruding from his body. Red flames shooting out blend seamlessly with the dog's signature red bandana. More fundamentally, the Negro de Matapacos lent itself to a playful, irreverent protest discourse. Absurdist and humoristic representations broke through an otherwise polarizing divide between those who advocated violence and those pursuing peaceful protest. As the graphic artist Kauzama reflected to us in an interview, the absurdity of an imaginary dog taking on a central role in the protests revealed the ways in which, quote, humor had become a weapon. This poster depicting the Matapacos as a cartoonish, fire-breathing dog setting ablaze the 1980 Constitution. The surrealistic absurdity of the image, heightened by the use of collage and childlike markings, conjured a sense of playful attack, while affirming commonly held sentiments of frustration and rage aimed at this potent political symbol of the Pinochet era. Indeed, the sheer number of iterations of the Negro Matapacos are too numerous to enumerate. The dog appeared in all forms of graphic media, as Pablo showed earlier, and in a multitude of poses and aesthetic configurations. Whether depicted as pacifist saint, aggressive combatant, or playful interlocutor, each of these protest graphics shared a common underlying signifier, solidarity. As an emblem of empowerment, he succeeded in transcending internal disputes over tactics and ideology to emerge as a unifying symbol, one readily embraced across the protest spectrum. Here, the stenciled text, "Sigue ladrando," appears below an image of a dog bounding forward. Even though the coloring has shifted, the reference to the Negro de Matapacos, reinforced by his trademark bandana, is self-evident. As the dog who keeps barking, the Matapacos functioned as a symbol of encouragement to the vast collective that constituted the protest movement. Moreover, the inherent ambiguity of the Spanish, because here sigue means continues, but it could also mean the command form of to continue, you must continue, reinforce the message, we're still here. In other words, so long as the spirit of the Matapacos is, quote, still barking, we, the marchers, will keep on barking by making ourselves heard as well. In a fundamental sense, these diverging portrayals of the Negro de Matapacos reflected the competing strands of protest epistemologies embedded within the Estallido Social. At one end of a broad spectrum of protest actions and attitudes, there stood those who embraced nonviolence as a strategy of resistance. This was a position grounded in a broader set of assumptions about the power of collective mass organization. At the other end stood those who regarded violence both as a legitimate means of self-defense in the face of police repression and a necessary element to harness for the destruction of the neoliberal order itself. Commenting on a phrase widely disseminated on certain protest graphics, todas las balas se van a devolver, or all of the police bullets will come back at you. A member of a silkscreen artist collective remarked to us, quote, "At a certain point, we're going to attack back. Though for us artists, at least, this will come from the graphic trenches. But the pueblo, at a given moment, is going to attack the carabineros, the military, the upper classes." Significantly, the Matapacos was also embraced by protest movements outside of Chile, as Pablo also showed. The imperative to evade reached New York streets when numerous youth jumped subway turnstiles in Manhattan in mid-November of 2019 to protest excessive police force. This protest graphic, which circulated on social media, depicts the black cop killer mascot of Chile's social revolution, then still unfolding in a fierce frontal stance. Here he stands dripping at the edge of the New York harbor, as if he had just swum up from the southern shores of Chile. In the background, we see the Statue of Liberty with a raised fist in solidarity. The rage has arrived to New York.
The deployment of the Negro Matapacos to disarm and depolarize was perhaps best exemplified by Marcel Sola's massive sculpture made from wire, steel, and recycled materials. Notably, the sculpture depicts the Negro Matapacos in a sitting position, one of tranquil repose, similar to the saintlier representations discussed above. Sporting a red bandana and looking out toward Plaza Dignidad, the dog became the most iconic marker of the revolution. Marcel called it, and I'm quoting, an offering to the Chilean pueblo, quote, a tribute to all those who have fought tirelessly for social justice and dignity. He considered the mestizo dog to be symbolic, representing both the mixed ethnic identities of the people and their struggle for social and political justice. I'm quoting, the quiltro, which is a Mapuche term for street dog, is the most accurate expression of our identity, he explained in an interview. And often a sector of society abandons quiltros, mistreats them, and discriminates against them in the same way that the political class ignores the problems of many Chileans. Made of recycled materials drawn from the debris of the demonstration, Marcel's monumental Negro Matapacos stood 10 feet tall and weighed almost 200 pounds. He found the creation process itself to be meaningful, a, quote, way of saying that symbolic reconstruction can occur from destruction. As Pablo pointed out, the sculpture was installed on November 15th in a park near the Salvador metro station, a location whose name, Salvador, or Savior, echoed the dog's redemptive value. As soon as Marcel's dog made his appearance in the park, he was swept up by crowds and paraded through the city streets on a litter. And as Pablo illustrated so beautifully, the sculpture unleashed such strong emotions that it was subject to acts of physical violence. Within a period of 2 weeks, in which it was vandalized, dragged through the streets by tanks, and repeatedly set on fire, it was reduced to its bare bones. Through a collective effort, a more enduring version of the Negro Matapacos was created by a team of sculptors. And as you mentioned, the second metallic version, which weighs 5 times more than the first, now was installed near the Plaza Dignidad and now sits in the Museo del Estallido Social. Marcel's monumental statue is inscribed in a larger movement to reclaim public space and public monuments. So I want to take a step back and talk a minute about the statue of Baquedano. The symbolic center of the Estallido was Plaza Italia, or Plaza Baquedano, which was then renamed Plaza Dignidad by protesters. It was so named after the monumental equestrian statue of 19th century military hero General Manuel Baquedano that presided over the square. Protesters renamed the site Plaza Dignidad and held on to it as one would a military position. As a counter monument, 3 wooden sculptures carved by artists of the Colectivo Originario were installed in the square. The sculptures looked out toward the city, serving as symbolic foundational figures. As soon as the COVID-19 quarantine was put into effect in March 2020, 5 months after the start of the estallido, government authorities removed the 3 indigenous statues. Anthropologists at a Chilean university issued a statement condemning, quote, this act of strong symbolic and political violence, holding that, quote, it is worrisome that those who undertook this act of erasure do not understand that the city, as well as society, can no longer be understood from a single vantage point or narrated with a single voice. At the 1-year anniversary of the social uprising, the monument was again in play, while protesters painted the statue red by day to symbolize the blood spilled in the uprising. Authorities restored it to its original state by night. On October 16th, journalist John Bartlett tweeted, "The statue has been painted blood red this evening." The statue was such an important symbol that the state eventually removed it entirely. And we found it notable that Marcel's statue was propped up onto the empty plinth, and that would make a kind of fitting end to our presentation. It would be hard to overstate the significance of this occupation of the center of the city. The struggle for the statue of Baquedano is in essence a struggle for the soul of the nation, its history, its narratives, its memories, its myths. Who owns public space? Who makes Chilean history? Whose stories are told, narrated, remembered? Across the country, protesters demanded alternative historical narratives, toppling, defacing, and decapitating colonial and nationalistic statues. During the estallido, over 300 monuments were subject to symbolic violence. This movement to expose and reject violent foundational myths was part of a global campaign, one which took on even greater momentum with the Black Lives Matter movement in June 2020. Like the 3 indigenous statues installed at Ground Zero, counter-monuments provide an alternative vision of Chile's cultural and political heritage. Sola's massive sculpture is one of the most notable counter-monuments of the estallido, and it is no surprise that it has elicited such strong emotions across the political spectrum. As opposed to a national war hero, it monumentalizes a street dog, pointing to the mixed-race heritage of the Chilean people and the long history of colonial and class struggles. Marcel's Negro Matapacos sculpture has recently come under fire, as Pablo pointed out. Despite the disproportionate police violence during the estallido, rising crime rates have led to greater support for the institution of the police. In the wake of the murder of 3 officers within the span of a month in early 2023, some right-wing figures have pointed to the cop killer dog as an incitement to violence. These attacks are reminiscent of the criminal charges brought by the Carabineros de Chile, the National Police Force, against Las Tesis, the performance collective whose rape protest song, Un violador en tu camino, A Rapist in Your Path, became a global feminist anthem in 2019-20 for disturbing public order. So the state brought criminal charges against a performance collective for inciting violence and disturbing public order, charges which were eventually dropped, but after a pretty complicated legal case. What we would suggest is that the threat posed by Marcel's statue lies not in its inflammatory name, but rather in its symbolic threat to power structures, national history, and cultural memory. The Negro Matapacos represents the spirit of the people and suggests that history is and should be made from below. Thank you. And
So, Harry and Eric, yeah, please continue.
We had a few, to conclude, we had a few questions to open up to Marcel or Pablo or in general. So the 3 questions that came to mind to us based on the presentations. The first would be, if you could collaborate on the collective production process, elaborate on the collective production process behind the creation of the two Negro Matapacos sculptures, and the way this process might reflect the ethos of the statue itself. So something, the collaborative production processes at work, which we saw in so much of the street art in the period. The second question is, how do you see the Negro Matapacos sculpture in relation to the movement to topple and replace colonial statues in Chile? Do you agree that it is a kind of counter monument? Would you put it in that kind of classification? And finally, could you say something about the recent claims and attacks that the statue is an incitement to violence and the larger attempt by the state to crack down on protest art? So something, thinking about production processes, counter monuments, and crackdowns on protest art.
Yeah, I wonder, Pablo, if you want to start something about the production process, or maybe Marcel, you will fill in about what kind of thoughts were put into the producing this monument.
Igualmente podrías hablar en español y Pablo traduce o algo así si sientes mejor.
Sí, primero me gustaría como aclarar un poco la primera pregunta que hice relación con algo como el proceso de producción colectiva, ¿no? Como de
¿Y cuál
símbolos.
es el proceso colectivo que produjo el Matapacos? Si podrías hablar un poco de ese proceso de colaboración, que era un esfuerzo colectivo.
Sí, bueno, en principio yo participé activamente de las manifestaciones desde el primer día del estallido, y lo que noté es que en términos como antropológicos uno nota que siempre se hace necesario aferrarse a algún símbolo, sobre todo cuando no hay líderes o portavoces al cual uno como sociedad, pueblo, poder atribuir cierta representatividad. La humanidad está tan desacreditada, la clase política tan desacreditada, que en este caso florece o asoma este ícono del perro negro Matapacos como símbolo, y yo quise enaltecerlo con esta obra monumental, entendiendo su formato, para que de alguna manera generara esta sensación de integración en torno a lo que representa, y este sentido de pertenencia que muy bien decía Pablo, básicamente, y siento que la dimensión de participación co-creativa o colectiva se genera a partir del primer día que surge esta necesidad de construir algo a partir de los residuos. Las personas participaron en la recolección de residuos, me colaboraron sin saber de qué se trataba, pero también en los procesos seguidos de reconstrucciones participó muchísimas personas. Por lo tanto, ya pasó de ser una obra singular o de autoría singular a una obra de carácter colectivo.
I just want to pause you, Marcel, and just translate a little bit. So Eric asked about this collaborative process of making the Matapacos monument, and Marcel answered that he, by experiencing this collective subject that was formed during the Estallido Social, that he felt inspired to create something that could represent this new subject. And then this project came to be. And then further on, Marcel used the residues, the material left by the protests for the statue, and it actually organically evolved from being a single author work to actually a collaborative work where many people were able to participate in various ways, as we saw with the flowers, and as we also saw with the metallic armor that was put on the dog, or these processions to the main square in Santiago. Yes.
I just had a quick question. I thought, if I understood from Pablo's presentation earlier, did you say, Pablo, that Marcel was already making a sculpture of the Matapacos before the estallido? Like he already had this as an idea that coming out of to monumentalize the 2011 movement, or maybe I misunderstood that. Because I was a little unclear if he already had a kind of conceptual idea for the Matapacos that then suddenly with the estallido became one of greater urgency, perhaps, or if it was born right after, the 18th of October, and that's when this came into being.
Well, it is correct that the construction started before the revolt. I don't know exactly which were Marcel's motivations during that time in order to start working. Marcel, ¿cuáles eran tus motivaciones meses antes de la revuelta a la hora de empezar a construir la escultura?
La verdad que tenía que ver con uno de los... yo la empecé como a idear en julio del mismo año 2019. No quiero parecer como quien viene a vaticinar un poco el futuro, pero se sentía una energía particularmente en la sociedad de descontento, y yo pensé en desarrollar una creación, en principio de tamaño más pequeño, y empecé a reunir material, pero siempre quise representar al perro. Entonces, básicamente esa construcción empieza en julio y se paraliza al mes siguiente porque tuve que generar un proyecto para una ONG, una gran ballena, para la cual tuve que redestinar ese plástico que había recolectado. Entonces, básicamente cuando, como comentaba, salí a las calles los primeros días de la manifestación, dije, ahora más que nunca tengo que retomar este constructo que se había iniciado, y agrandarlo, enaltecerlo aún más, porque había pensado una escala de 2 metros. Pero efectivamente se empieza a generar antes por una manera de, tal como decía Terry, de homenajear a la lucha permanente que ha dado la clase popular en Chile, que se representa mucho con los símbolos del perro Matapacos.
Yeah, quickly translating what Marcel said, he started working on the construction of the statue months before the revolt because he already sensed in the environment, some kind of foreseen even, that something was about to happen, and he considered it important to do this homage to the dog, to the symbol. And then the revolt started, and he went to recollect new plastic for the construction, but and that was it. Then on November 15, it was put on public space due to the disagreement of the politician class. And well, that's the history of what happened.
And then the second question was if you see the Negro Matapacos as a kind of counter monument, along the lines of the indigenous statues put in Plaza Baquedano.
Would you put it in that similar context as Terry was presenting, or do you see it in some other kind of space as a form of political discourse?
Yo creo que lo importante acá es destacar que en términos fenomenológicos lo que ocurrió en Chile fue que muchas personas atentaron, subvirtieron, alteraron ciertos monumentos presentes en espacios públicos que no les representan. Básicamente esos monumentos que tienden a ser enfoques colonizadores, de supuestas gestas heroicas, de guerras que nadie reconoce como realmente válidas, o se siente representado con esas luchas. Por lo tanto, en principio, una de las tantas acciones términos sociales, fue subvertirlas, alterarlas, travestirlas, todos esos monumentos. El perro surge como un correlato, efectivamente como un contramonumento, en el entendido de que es un símbolo validado per se por la sociedad chilena, por la clase popular en gran medida. Entonces, eso se reafirma al momento que llega al espacio público y genera la dimensión de pertenencia y apropiación. Entonces, en ese sentido, el perro dialoga y tensiona básicamente en torno a esta validación de qué ha de ser denominado monumento, ¿ya? Por eso a nosotros nos gusta hablar de monumento, porque finalmente el monumento es un término muy institucional, muy de alguien que define qué es, a partir de un decreto, qué es digno de denominar monumento o no. En este caso, un monumento alzado desde las demandas del pueblo cobra más sentido y sobre todo se potencia la dimensión performática del monumento, entendido que es una pieza que puede movilizarse y estar en permanente validación y integración con territorios, con distintas comunidades.
So what Marcel said was that yes, he sees the Matapacos statue as some sort of counter monument, especially a work that is in dialogue with this traditional monumental landscape in Chile that is filled to the brim with conquistadores, military heroes related to grand national military victories, but also related to the genocide of the indigenous people as well in Chile. And the work goes into dialogue with these traditional monuments, serving as a more representative side of memory in the urban space, if we relate it to a terminology that we use in cultural memory studies, right? So there was this with the statue, there was this idea of also playing with the concept of a monument. What is a monument? Where the Matapacos statue was a more performatic, performative version of the traditional monument, which was also clearly visible in the way that that activists on the streets interacted with this piece, bringing it to Plaza Dignidad spontaneously. So yeah, I think that was the gist of what Marcel explained in Spanish. Should we take one more question from you, Terry and Eric, and then move on to the questions from the audience?
Our last question was
There's a last question, no? The first.
was whether you could comment on the recent claims about the incitement to violence and the way in which this fits into larger attempts by the state to crack down on protest art.
Pablo can answer.
Well, I think that this whole move of the politician class against the figure of the Matapacos and broadly against all what happened during the revolt is to wash up their images, because the political class is not at all representative of the people. They only represent themselves, and all the revolt, all the imaginary around the Matapacos does not serve them. In fact, it bothers them. So they need to eliminate any trace of positiveness around the Matapacos. So when another revolt or big manifestation happens again, and once again the figure of the Matapacos rises, now more people will have at least the doubt of, well, this is the dog which many policemen were being killed because of this dog. Well, maybe I don't relate to this symbol like I did 5 years ago or 10 years or whenever, because it's now tainted with this negativeness. So I think it's a tactical move on the politician class to to attack all expressions of protest art, because they know the threat of artistic movements. They know the real power behind it. They can really move many people, and they need to crowd control them. So that's my take on the attack on protest art.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I think we will move on now to questions from the audience. So I will make it possible for you to unmute yourself, but but it would be best if you use the raised hand function before you speak. So does anyone have any questions to Marcel and Pablo, or Terry and Eric? Also, feel free to use the chat. I will supervise that as well. Let me see. Maybe while we wait for more questions, I will start with one. So Pablo and Marcel, I was wondering what thoughts went into choosing the original location for the statue intervention, Plaza La Aviación. I would wonder if you could elaborate a little bit on that. Why was the dog placed in that urban space?
El sentido de posicionar la figura en la Plaza de la Aviación, en el metro Estación Salvador, tal como planteó Terry y Eric, en principio era citar la palabra Salvador, ¿ya? En esa doble acepción o doble interpretación, como el perro que viene a salvar, pero también una cita a Salvador Allende también. Y por otro lado, la disposición del perro dando la cara, mirando hacia la Plaza de la Dignidad, anhelando esa dignidad, esa justicia social, y dando la espalda a un monumento que es tremendamente nefasto a mi juicio, porque es un monumento homenaje a la aviación y que sintetiza en términos abstractos la forma de un saludo fascista, ¿ya? En el ángulo, en la posición en que está erguido ese monumento, es finalmente una alusión directa a los nazis, ¿ya? Entonces, en ese caso, el perro, el día, poca gente reparó en el detalle, pero cuando se instaló en ese lugar específico, se puso el perro dispuesto, dando la espalda a este monumento, inmediatamente arrojamos agua, simulando que el perro orinaba y mojaba al monumento, finalmente. Tomaba posición de ese territorio y negaba, o de alguna manera era poner su presencia, imponer a ese discurso neofascista.
Okay, so what Marcel answered was that there was a two-part reason for this specific place in Santiago, why this was chosen for the original location for the statue intervention. So this Plaza La Aviación, that's very close to the big square with the Baquedano monument that Terry and Eric showed in their presentation. There is a monument that was erected during the military dictatorship dedicated to the Chilean Air Force, a branch of the armed forces that's most notably known for the bombing of the presidential palace during the military coup in 1973. And what Marcel said, that there was this two-part reason for putting the dog right there with its back turned against this monument and then facing towards Plaza Dignidad. That was that it was close to this metro station called Salvador Savior that played on one part this savior figure that the killjoy was, but also evoking the memory of the late President Salvador Allende, who was the president that was ousted by Augusto Pinochet during the military coup in 1973. So there was this dual play. And then what Marcel also noted was that it was also a way of countering this monument to the Chilean Air Force. That is a monument that resembles an airplane taking off in some kind of way, but can also allude to a Nazi salute being having a little bit of a neo-fascist design in some kind of way, and turning this dog's back against this monument was a way of answering and counteracting the presence of this monument in the urban space. And Marcel also mentioned that water was spread out around the monument when they initially put it, the Matapacos monument, they eventually put it there, playing on this whole street dog phenomenon of a dog marking its territory, efficiently making the street dog monument marking its territory, occupying the urban space, playing on this. Yes. So any questions from the audience? Yes, we have a question from Hannah. Please go ahead and.
Hi, thank you very much. I'm going to ask in English and then translate it to Spanish for Marcel. First of all, thank you very much for the occasion and for organizing that, Alexander. And for me, it's really because I'm in Chile right now. I know Marcel and I read your book, Terry and Eric. So it's an amazing combination. My question is in terms of memory. I'm interested in like the relationship between Matapacos and all the people that became symbols during the revolt, like Salvador Allende, Victor Jara, Gladys Marin, Pedro Lemebel. I would like to know like how you think that these different representations of different periods linked to each other. Ya, lo voy a traducir para ti, Marcel.
No,
Lo
I
que...
understand.
¿Sí? Ya, dale.
Ya.
Mejor aún. Bueno,
Pero-
quien quiera,
pero-
como...
Bueno, primero, lo importante es decir que durante el estallido, tal como mostraron muy bien en la presentación Terry y Eric, surgieron referentes icónicos que se resignificaron de alguna manera en el contexto del estallido social. Imágenes como, tal como decías tú, de Salvador Allende, de Víctor Jara, de incluso Gabriela Mistral, digamos, la poetisa ganadora del Premio Nobel, que asoma como un referente de lucha de un feminismo que viene a reivindicarse y que obviamente tuvo un referente importante también en aquella escritora, pero cómo se disponen hoy en día esas imágenes en términos como íconos muy pop, por así decirlo, populares, en la medida que se repiten de manera seriada con distintas reinterpretaciones. Por ejemplo, Violeta Parra, voy a poner un ejemplo, aparece en un muro a partir de una imagen dispuesta como un paste up con un bajo, una guitarra o un instrumento de una banda reciente como es Los Prisioneros. O sea, en el fondo es cómo actualizamos un referente icónico de lucha, de reivindicación de valores identitarios populares y luchas persistentes a partir de imágenes que son dispuestas en términos, en ese contexto de presente, pero de manera en que tanto sean sus técnicas, las disciplinas que son dispuestas son de manera, son más obviamente contemporáneos, pero también estas citas incorporan referentes para contemporaneizar y entender que esos referentes son más válidos que muchos y muchas más en términos presentes, que cuánto falta, la conclusión es, a partir de esas imágenes que uno puede extraer, es cuánto faltan referentes icónicos de lucha hoy presentes. En las últimas 2 o 3 décadas se han ido extinguiendo. De ahí la necesidad de reivindicar estas imágenes. El perro es una de las tantas, pero rescato mucho lo que has planteado tú, Hanna, de otros referentes.
Do you want to translate or should I, Hannah?
Whatever you prefer.
Well, go ahead if you can.
Okay. Yeah, I think like what Marcel explained, that it's like no, it's not only the people like I just mentioned, like Allende, Jara, Marin. that came up as new symbols and icons, but that there were like even other characters from earlier times on, and he mentioned Gabriela Mistral, who is a Nobel Prize winner, and that her books and her poems and she as a figure were taken up again during the revolt, especially for the feminist movement, and they were all like re-signified and earned these new meanings, and were Marcel used a word which is really helpful and difficult for me to translate into English. I might be able to say it in German, but like contemporaneizar, like to make these figures contemporary again by giving them new representations. Like for example, the singer Violeta Parra, which appeared in paste-ups with the guitar from a contemporary band. So like there were like these updates, and Marcel said like that he thinks that these updates, this like making contemporary again these figures, was relevant because there is a lack of symbols and as well of examples to follow in the last 2 or 3 decades. Esto mole.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Hannah. Any more questions? Let me see here. Just yes, Philip.
Hello?
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank you for this very interesting presentation. I'm not really that familiar with this whole topic beyond what I've heard from Alexander from time to time, but I just had a clarifying question about the Hachiko dog from Japan. If I remember correctly, it was Tara and Eric who presented this dog as, from my recollection, the statue of a dog that was very loyal to his owner after his death, and were waiting for him at this train station. And then I don't know, Japanese authorities or maybe Japanese public decided to create this statue. And I was just wondering, when we're talking about these symbols that we attribute to dogs, and whether or not it's a saint or whether or not it's a rebel, were there any sort of what were the considerations, if you know, with putting this red bandana on this specific dog, which I would imagine symbolizes something very different from some of these other dogs that we've talked about?
Yeah, thank you for that. It's a really good point, because I know when we were researching for the book, we came to discover that there were these other, versions of protesters also embracing dogs as protest symbols. It was Japan, I think it was in Italy as well, if I remember correctly. And that kind of surprised us, because we realized, there was it's organic, but there's also a kind of synchronicity or something happening. I mean, this raises a question that I have for Sola and for others, for Chileans out there, because for me it seemed that it was not simply coincidence that a red bandana was put on a black dog. Those are the symbols of anarchism, in which has a very strong, deep historical roots in Chile. Also, the colors of one of the most important resistance movements under Pinochet that fought the Pinochet regime. So I wonder, the choice of, the original Matapacos was a black stray dog, right? So that's there. But the black bandana, the red bandana, then turns him more specifically into a political, using those colors into a political symbol that has meaning in a Chilean context. So I was wondering about that. And of course we see that the bandana does change color. So, you know, it becomes a feminist green bandana at one point as well. So, you know, the bandana coloration takes on different signifying meanings. But I wonder if you might comment on the choice of the red bandana against the black dog. That's for Marcel or Pablo.
Sí, creo que el uso de la bandana roja responde mucho a lo que has planteado, Eric. Efectivamente, hay una perspectiva de una cita directo al anarquismo, también hay a las reivindicaciones de diversas luchas, particularmente de víctimas de la dictadura. También hay que decirlo que es un color muy utilizado desde los distintos pueblos indígenas para aludir a los genocidios a los cuales han sido expuestos durante años. Y por otro lado, la idea es resignificarlo como una lucha persistente que nos acompaña, que la reconocemos como continua, eh, pero que en este caso también incorpora otras bandanas conforme a distintas luchas a las cuales nos, nos vamos vinculando y a las cuales también adherimos, tales como las luchas de las disidencias sexuales, de la propia lucha de los pueblos originarios del norte, del sur, de distintos sectores. Lo interesante es que cada bandana que fue realizada en cada territorio fue ejecutada, diseñada íntegramente y espontáneamente por las comunidades. No tuvo una base, un guión premeditado desde los autores, digamos, de ejecutores originales. Fue parte del fenómeno espontáneo que fue ocurriendo después, pero de esa manera surgieron bandanas moradas, banderas de colores alusivas a la lucha de cada territorio, bandera negra incluso para aludir al luto, bandera asociada a los pueblos, a los equipos de fútbol incluso, como una manera de decir, aquí estamos todos unidos, no hay división.
So what Marcel answered was that this red bandana was linked to many different struggles. It was also a symbol of, could also be interpreted as a symbol of the victims of the dictatorship, the more than 3,000 people who were murdered. And also the victims of the genocides inflicted upon the indigenous peoples in Chile. And then Marcel went on and talked about this the smaller version of the Matapacos statue that traveled around Chile, went, for example, to the north of Chile. At here, every single time the statue went to a new place, a new community, the community would spontaneously create new bandanas that could be put that was put on the dog, and these bandanas alluded to various local struggles related to environmental struggles, struggles of inequality that were specific to the area where this statue visited. Yeah. And with this, we have actually made it to 5 o'clock here in Europe, which means that we have used all of our time. I want to once again thank the invited speakers for participating, and I also want to thank everyone who joined us today for this fascinating discussion of the Matapacos protest symbol and Marcel's work. Before I let you all go, I want to remind you that we have a third online session coming up on the 6th of May about conspiratorial far-right memory on the online forum 4chan that is hosted by Philip, my colleague here in Aarhus. And in the session, Philip will be joined by Daniel Bach from the Danish Defense Intelligence Services in a conversation about memory and online conspiracy theories. So make sure not to miss that. More info about the event and registration will be published through the MSA channels very, very soon. So I would just want to finish by wishing you all a great weekend, and thank you so much for being here with us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex, for
Everybody.
organizing. Marcel, un gustazo. Pablo,
Un
igualmente.
gusto. Muchas
Sí.
gracias a ustedes y
Estamos
a
en
seguir
contacto.
adelante.
Muy bien.
Muchas
Ok.
gracias a
Dios.
todos y a la
Chao.
organización.
Dios.
Vale.
Muchas gracias.
Chao.
Chao.